Welcome back, folks. We're now going to invite Anthony back into our conversation, who's going to talk about incorporating agility into our organization. Like with the previous sessions, folks, please use either the chat box or the Q&A. We'll try to moderate these throughout. Otherwise, we can keep questions to the end, whatever kind of works for everybody. But with that, Anthony, I'd like to invite you in. Here we go.
Thank you, Brian. I'm excited to be here today. Thank you, everybody, for the participants that are on. I'm actually very excited as well about talking about agility and incorporating agile into your organization. When we think of agile, traditionally, everybody thinks of the methodology, um, but this methodology can be moved throughout other areas of the organization. So what I want to do, we're hoping we'll talk about a better clarity of what agile is, its past, how you can, apply it to your projects and organizations, but also hopefully be ready to champion for the change in your organization, the agility by the end of this. Again, as they've mentioned before, we've got the chat open, we've got the Q&A open, so please feel free to ask questions throughout. If we can answer them at the time and stop, we will if it's a good point, or answer them at the end. Just a quick introduction of me. I spoke a little bit earlier about the PMI ACP. Let's talk about, I have been working with T for several years in a consultant role, as well as offering classes in PMI, ACP, and PMP, working with organizations on incorporating project management into their system. I've done a podcast on project management in the past. I teach project management at a local college. I have my master's degree in project management. So project management is a large passion of mine. When we talk about how we get into agility and agile, I remember when I first started thinking of agile, I was one of those, I wasn't an early adopter, I guess I would say. I really always enjoyed knowing like the traditional of like, what is your beginning and your end. I liked knowing what was happening, but as I became more knowledgeable about agile and started actually applying those principles, uh, I I think it's a very important skill, not only in project managers but in organizations, and that's where we talk about incorporating it into your organization, because being more agile, adaptive, and flexible becomes more of the new norm. And it's more than just managing projects. It's, how do you act about your strategy, how your execution in your business, how do you move with your organization? So we'll talk about the rise and fall of agile, especially in project management, but then how is that reshaping the management within the organization? So for today, we will first cover again some history and rise of Agile. I know we talked about it a little bit this afternoon. If you were at the session for the PMI ACP, we'll cover it again. Some basics of Agile methods. Does Agile work for your business? And bringing it into your organization. And we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end and throughout. First thing I'd like to ask everybody though, and you can use chat, you can use questions, and think of a word or two. What do you think of when you hear the term agile? Because throughout history, we come up with lots of key terms in businesses. Let's do TQM, we're going to do lean, we're going to do all these things. We want to be, but if somebody was to come to you for your organization and say, I want us to be agile, what do you think of? I mean, what is the first thing that comes to mind? So give people a second to think about that and put it in. Flexibility, nimble, flexible, adaptive. Fred, yes, in there for servant leadership. I like that. Efficient. So we come up with some words, some thoughts, and a lot of organizations. What I find, you can continue to throw some words in there if you think of it. It's not agile isn't only a way of managing projects. What we're going to talk about today is it starts with the mindset. So we have to be in an agile mindset. We have to think in an agile way before we can start working in an agile way. And agile, typically, when we think about it, you're providing more, value more quickly. You're embracing change. You're looking, as mentioned earlier in other presentations, which we've had a lot of conversations today and a lot of topics that we talked about agility, which is great. But having that customer-centric view to our work, making sure that we're improving group success by collaborating, not working in silos, understanding the requirements thoroughly, and having those regular feedback loops with the customer, keeping workloads within capacity. So not overworking, not doing more than what we can do, and not promising more than we can provide in a single iteration. But also learning from our experience, continuously learning. Sometimes, with traditional, when we think about traditional project management, you have a lessons learned at the end of the project. It's different with Agile. We're consistently learning from our experiences, improving, and we need to learn to apply those to not only our projects, but to our organization to be able to react more quickly to the market, to react more quickly to what our customers are needing. So again, we'll go over that history of Agile. Agile, it started in, although there were Agile practices before, really came to the forefront in the year 2000. Because before Agile, you to get anything to market is like, just like traditional waterfall, you have your set of requirements and scope. You know what you're doing, you're setting it out, you're designing it, you're going to build it, test it, fix errors, and launch. And hopefully, at that launch, when you're showing that to the customer, it's what the customer wanted. You understood what the customer's needs were. With Agile, it makes it a lot simpler. We're not waiting to the end to make sure that we're doing the right thing, we're providing value. So again, this all started with software engineers, software developers. So 17 got together. They wanted to reduce the delay of, the customer benefit, get quicker feedback. Met again less than a year later and came up with this Agile manifesto, which again, we discussed a little bit earlier, but to review it as individuals over interactions, again, making sure that we're worried more about our people, how they interact, how do they work together. We have process and tools, but not being so strict with them and changing them when they don't make sense or when they're not working. Making sure that we have the working software or the development or the product that we can show over, documenting it extensively. Because we want to, as we make changes with Agile, it is a change, it's very much change, and we're accepting that change and we're working with that change. We don't want to start documenting things heavily and then realize we've made a change in each iteration. We have to go back and constantly change that. Again, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. We have contracts. We have to have contracts. We have to have those understandings, but we want to make sure we're working with the customer. We want to make sure we have their input. We want to make sure that we're making sure, again, that we're delivering value often, but we're delivering the right value. And then responding to change over following a plan, because again, we have shorter iterations, shorter feedback loops, instead of waiting, till we've launched the product and say, well, we hope this is what you wanted. We hope this is what you needed. This is what we understood. Here you go. So that's how Agile started. That's where we began within Agile. A nice graphical version of this is where we really came through and how it's grown. And today, especially, there is it's increased popularity. Started again with the manifesto and the Agile Alliance created back in 2000, 2001. Again, Scrum was working before that, but there really wasn't a movement for it. And as the movement started, as people started hearing about it and using it, there became that increased interest in it. And then eventually, with people using it and comparing it, we were able to see the success metrics. And that even increased the interest in it because people understood that this actually works. This will do what we want it to do. And this is going to make us more efficient, deliver value better. And that's also during the same time that PMI decided to start launching its PMI ACP, which has gone through several iterations. And again, now in a different state about 10 years later, where they have increased their documentation and their training materials and their support of the certification. Again, it's popular now. And the thing that's really popular now is using hybrid models. There was a question in the earlier presentation is about the resistance of some organizations to go fully agile and why, why would that be? They want to have, different models. That makes sense, actually. Um, Having a hybrid model, depending on the organization, works because if you're a good example of doing an agile is, you have waterfall planning, maybe some agile development, and then some waterfall ending to where you're planning out what you're going to do. I work with a uh, virtual trainer. She decides, the organization designs uh, online training, live presentation classes like this. But you design, you come up with the plan in a waterfall. This is what we want to do. We've got the plan. But then when you're designing the actual training modules, you're designing the online version, whatever you're using, React, or whether you're using another Rise site. But doing that in an agile development makes more sense because then you can get quicker feedback. This is what we're creating. Here's an example. Here's your first module. Does this work for you? How does this tie in? Are we going in the right direction? Is this visually pleasing for your students? And then after you've got the development, other training or finalizing the project makes sense in waterfall. Developing the training materials, the documentation. Now that you've got the training done, you have to have the workbooks or the job aids that you create from that. It makes more sense because you can start building those and have deadlines and have a more traditional type of project plan for those. The structure as well is going to be different in a hybrid model. Traditionally, we have project managers. When we start looking at agile, we have different roles: scrum masters, product owners. So how do we need to start incorporating those into the team structure as opposed to looking at how, having a strict hybrid model or a strict waterfall model or a strict agile model structure. So some basics and methods of agile we're going to talk about. And we're going to also when we start looking at these, we're looking at them right now from a project management standpoint, but also we're going to look at them from how do you apply these to an organization and not just to project management. The backbone of agile, besides the four values, is what they call the 12 principles. Uh, the 12 principles I have listed here: satisfying the customer, embracing change, develop product frequently, collaborate daily, motivate and support your team, face-to-face communication, progress through working products, agile processes for sustainability, technical excellence, simplicity, self-organized teams, and regular reflection and adjustment. So these are the principles. When we look at this from an organizational standpoint, I mean, part of agile is embracing change. We have always the strict, if you think about traditional organizations, they have processes in place. It can sometimes take a very long time to make changes to products. It can make changes to processes. When you're looking at yourself as an agile organization, having those processes in place to quickly make a change, listening to your customers. Customers don't like a product you have or a service you have. Getting that feedback quickly and being able to advise leadership or advise the development team. How do we change this? Let's have this conversation. Collaborating daily within an organization. I know we have so many meetings in a day, and it's like, why we don't want more meetings just for the sake of meetings. But there are areas that collaborating daily could be helpful. You're in a customer service organization. You have agents that talk to the customers all day long, or you have, customers that are interacting with certain people. If there are things happening with the organization that will that need to be passed on to the customer, or that would help your interaction with the customer, a quick daily stand-up would be helpful to pass that information on, or to collect the feedback you're getting from the customers. What did you hear today? What are the customers wanting today that we can put into our backlog what we can figure out. And these faced and motivating support and supporting your team, we need to do that whether we're in an agile or traditional organization, finding out what motivates them, keeping them informed, helping them understand why we do what we do, how do what they do every day, the employees, tie into the strategy of the organization and what we're trying to achieve. And face-to-face communications being another backbone. I know today a lot of us are virtual, but face-to-face communications are still very important, like we are today, where we're on a Zoom, whether it be a Teams call. Emails and chat are great, but it doesn't replace that face-to-face communication. It it does not replace that interaction you get, that relationship you build from having that face-to-face communication. And that relationship helps with the trust that allows you to have the agility and allows you to have the ability to uh, have those conversations and get together when possible. I know not everybody can. We live in a virtual world. Some teams are spread out globally, but it's always great to have that in-person meeting retreat whenever possible. Agility and processes for sustainability. The importance here is to make sure that we're building processes that are able to change and adapt to the situation. Too many times we build black and white processes that if the problem is this, you have to do this, not taking into account that every customer has different needs, and we have to be able to change those processes in a quick manner sometimes, empowering our employees to make those decisions, even to be able to make those changes. And not have the long process to say, this isn't working. We need to come up with a better process. And when we think of agile, we think of it from a project management standpoint. A lot, looking at change. Change is not only in the project, but also in the processes to make sure that we're running the project in the best way possible. So if we're doing a sprint in an agile, in a scrum setting, and we're coming up to the end, we've done our, we're doing our customer review, and then we're having our retrospective, and we're looking at it. It's like, what went well during the sprint? What could we improve on? Are there processes that we need to change? And then find out and put those into place for the next sprint so we can continually improve, because we're not continually just improving our project, but our processes and our organization. We jump down to keeping it simple is like do what is necessary. Too many times we have so many processes or so many things in place that it feels like cutting through red tape. I know dealing with government offices, you have to fill out this form, it has to be mailed here, it has to do this. But if we're trying to be an agile organization and build this into it, we have to be able to keep it simple to make sure that when our customers need to get a hold of us or when we need to do something for our customers, we can, and we have that ability. And building these processes without ambiguity so that it's clear what we're doing. Self-organized team, I think, is very important for agile and for an organization. It comes to changes given our employees the ability to self-organize, the autonomy and empowerment to do in several organizations, some nonprofit, that when a leader is out, the employees and the team almost freeze because they don't feel like they have the power to make the decision. They don't feel like they have the power to reach out to a client or a customer and ask them a question because they may be overstepping. So we want to make sure that when we're looking at the agility and we're giving the employees that empowerment to do what is needed, things going. I just asked that question. Uh, Regular reflection, again, customer feedback, not only product process, and again, it's just like when we talk about the project, not waiting until something is done, or the project is done to say, did we do what we want to do? How did this project go? We have an agile project, we have 2 week sprints, 4 week sprints. So every 2 to 4 weeks, we're doing that reflection. How do we do that as an organization? How often do we make sure that we're doing what is needed and we adjust? Are we waiting to the end of the year when all the KPIs are reported? Or are we having regular meetings throughout the year and saying, okay, let's look at feedback. What can we do? Uh, Instead of waiting to the end of the year and realizing, oh, we didn't meet KPIs. We didn't do what we wanted to do. Well, why didn't? If we had met every quarter or every 2 months and reviewed things, could we have met our KPIs? So let's look at how can we build this into the organization, not only our projects, but also our processes, but our organization as a whole. So Anita asked, Agile is often confused with Scrum, which is why organizations sometimes push back. How can we help organizations understand that there are other Agile project management approaches and guide them down a path that best fits their needs? That is the exact reason why I asked the question I asked at the beginning of the presentation, because organizations do not always understand what it means to be agile. They sometimes think agile is this one way of doing things. And I'm going to tie this into the title of this summit, the Chief Project Management Officer. As people, if you even don't have that title, and you're aspiring for that role, or even if as a leader in agility, it's our job to help educate them. It's our job to let them understand, and it's part of the communication and the collaboration. Okay, you're pushing back because you think, Agile is Scrum. Find out what works for your organization. We're going to talk about some characteristics of different types of project management and Agile here in the next couple of slides. So looking at what does your organization do? What kind of business is it in? And propose that. Say, okay, I know Scrum doesn't work for us. Maybe predictive, or we'll talk about some of these coming up. Maybe there's a different type of methodology that would work for your organization and that can be introduced to them. So as we go through, maybe some of these will be answer some of your questions. So when we look at Agile, there is a spectrum of characteristics of project management. Predictive, the waterfall, you have fixed requirements, performed once for the whole project. You have that single delivery, and your goal is to manage cost. You have your triple constraints. You want to make sure that you're on time, on budget, and within scope. Then you have iterative and incremental. Iterative, you repeat the same process until you get exactly what you're trying to do. It's a dynamic. So you're going over and over, repeating the process. You're trying to build a box. You keep building that box until you get the exact box you want, to the box you're trying to build. So you build the box, you look at it, it's not exactly what you wanted, build the box again. You're still delivering one product, but you're making sure you deliver the right product. Incremental, you're performing once for a given increment. So you have a lot of frequent smaller deliveries. So you're trying to get something quickly to market or quickly to a team. And then Agile is again repeated until correct, but you're also delivering small deliveries. So it's kind of combining a little bit of iterative and incremental, because you're repeating it until it's correct, but instead of a single delivery, you have frequent small deliveries. So you're trying to provide value and as often as possible, and still getting feedback to make sure that we are on the correct path to what's going to serve the customer best. Organization be agile. What does my organization do? And is there an approach that makes more sense? Do we need to do something in an incremental fashion? Can we go fully agile? Do we have to have a combination? We talked about hybrid. So what's the best way for us to deliver value? Because there are some limitations to being agile. Agile is best when we know there's flexibility, when we're going to have the collaboration, and when there are iterations that are required. A lot of times when we go into an agile project, we may not know what the full requirements are going to be. So we start out with some high level requirements and then we evolve them over time. Uh, we have a lot of customer involvement. Again, within every review, after every iteration, we are delivering value. Quickly, it's a priority, and we have to be able to adapt to some rapid changes. If we think about software development, app creation, some digital marketing campaigns, using AI, machine learning projects, some new startups or um, minimum value product development, game development. Where it doesn't work is if you have a fixed scope. You know this is what you have to do, and you may not have a lot of access to the customer. So the customer's not able to meet with you every 2 weeks, or they don't want to meet with you every 2 weeks, or even maybe in some heavy regulated uh, industries that you have to follow the regulations. You have to develop things, your products according to the regulations. So there's not a lot of room for change or room for modification. And if your team, honestly, if you know your team and they don't have that ability to self-organize or communicate daily, you may not want to try to be agile because it's going to fail because you don't have a team that is actually working within those agile principles and values. So we can't always be agile. We may want to be, but we have to look at what do we have. And again, some parts of an organization may be able to, but not all parts. And so popular methods. So we're going to go through and just look at some advantages, disadvantages, and where we could apply some of these methods. So Kanban is that visual workflow. So if you ever use like Trello or you used, swim lanes to move projects along, that's what we talk about with Kanban. You have your limited work in progress. You have really good collaboration. Um, you can identify bottlenecks easily because if you have several columns, like you have your work in progress, you have your, what do we work, your backlog, your work in progress, what is in review, what is being reworked, what is completed. You can see what step of the process are things getting stuck in. So it helps you find those bottlenecks. Disadvantages is it could be lack of time frame. You may not know exactly how long something's going to take. When will the in review column get completed? If there's a lot of complexity, a lot of interrelated dependencies, it doesn't work very well because you have to have one step done before the next. It may not be how things are trying to move along within within the workflow. So when you're doing continuous improvement, bug fixing, or recruiting and onboarding, these are good places where this Kanban can work out because you may not have some of those disadvantages or some of those dependencies that require it. Scrum is iterative and incremental. It's easy to adapt to change. It is, customer centric. It's a very popular term a lot of people know about. It's not ideal for large teams. They say around seven, give or take a few people on a team is the ideal size team. You do have your strict time boxing, and it's a commitment for the team to commit and stick to these rules. Now, Scrum again, I'm just going to say can be adapted. They have these Scrum of Scrums where the larger teams can report to a higher Scrum team, but it's not ideal for the larger teams. It's more difficult. Software development, marketing, and creative projects are kind of where those work out very well. Lean eliminates waste, obviously continuous improvement, scalability, so you can scale up lean. Lack of defined roles, not ideal for fixed scope, same as if we look at other ideas where you have, agile fixed scope doesn't work well for. Manufacturing and supply chain work for that. It began with Toyota. Business operations work well for it. Extreme programming, one of the high quality code, you get fast feedback, you have team collaboration. But it is time sensitive because you have more than one person working on the code at the same time. It's large teams, it's difficult, and there's an overemphasis on testing. So there's a lot of testing when it comes to the extreme program. High risk for complex software, and even for is a good place for it when there's high risk complex software and rapidly changing projects. And then safe is a larger complex methodology. It's scalable, helps improve collaboration, alignment across teams. It is complex to implement. It is not very flexible. There's a lot of roles because it is made for larger teams. So you have a lot of people involved in it. So it is very complex to keep track of. It is more strict than Scrum. Uh, it's great for highly regulated sectors, though, multi-team projects and large corporations. So these are some of the popular, there are a lot of methods out there. And that's why I say when we talk about the question is like, Agile is often confused with Scrum. Scrum is a form of Agile. There are a lot of forms of Agile. So you have to look at your organization and decide what is the best method for the field that I am in and the types of projects that we do. Before we go into agility for organization, is there any questions? I'll just pause for a second. I'm going to take a drink of water and see if anybody has any questions about uh, agile and the types of agile and some of the applications of it.
Anthony, this is great. Thank you so much thus far. Folks, if you have questions, please use the chat box or the Q&A box.
And if you're thinking, go ahead and just type it in. I will continue. Again, we'll have some time at the end, so if you're still thinking or you're not sure how to phrase your question, feel free to just hold on to it. So how do we bring agile into the organization? Well, when we talk about agile, there's some research out there. If we look, this is from the Business Agility Institute, but um, organizations that have a higher business agility report higher ratings there's three key areas that the ratings are, increased on. We'll also talk about some revenue growth. Uh, Organizations, they're funding their work dynamically, so they have able to integrate diverse ideas quickly, um, and they seek out those ideas from a different range of sources. Empower with accountability. Empowerment is big in agility. Empowerment, autonomy, that self-organizing team. You've just got to make your team know that they are able to make the decisions. And there's so many bottlenecks that come into place in organizations when they have a hierarchy where the team feels stumped by the red tape and the complexity of processes. Um, funding work dynamically shifting funds. We'll talk later about some of the difference between project uh, selection in traditional versus agile organizations, but that funding work dynamically, being able to switch funds, when we see where less value is being brought in and we need to put those funds towards something that's providing the organization more valuable. So, and organizations with increasing business agility, there's the growth rate report where decrease, when they have a decreasing business agility, they do have an 8% growth. When they're, across organizations, the average is 25%. This was from 2024. But when you're increasing your business agility, it's 31%. So you get a higher revenue growth when your organization has more agility within it, is what we're showing. Because you need to be able to adapt quicker to the market, and that's where your revenue comes from. I think it's interesting because the last presentation talked about giving out samples and like a 2,000% increase in sales on what you're giving out samples for. Adapting to what the customer wants is very similar to that, because you're trying to, if the customer is asking for something and you give it to them, they're going to buy it. If that's what they want, but you need to make sure you're doing it in a productive and cost-effective manner. So quickly responding to the ever-changing customer needs is what being agile is all about. And increasing focus on employee empowerment and training, and making sure that the employees are there, that employees there can make the decisions they need to make, and that you trust them to make those decisions. Because again, the leadership's role is all starting with the mindset. We've talked about mindset several times. Understanding those 4 values that we talked about with Agile, and then applying those principles where appropriate. Identifying the practices, identifying the areas within your organization that agility works. Again, it may not work everywhere. There are projects that just agile just doesn't make sense. Processes just don't make sense. If there are strict regulations that you cannot change your process on, being agile in that, is not going to make sense. A safety regulation on a vehicle that you are producing and putting off the line, you can't change that process at your whim because there is a regulation to that safety standard. You can't decide that I want to change how the seatbelt works because, I think it'd be quicker to get on or off. There is a there is a safety regulation you have to follow. So you have to look, and again, it all starts with leadership, having the mindset, champion that mindset within your organization so that you're leading by example and pushing down the practices and pushing downstream the autonomy and the empowerment to your employees. Because being agile and doing agile are two different things. I have seen organizations fail by just doing and not being. Because being starts with that mindset. It starts with understanding and making sure the right practices, the right processes are in place and tailoring them where you need to tailor them. Where, just doing it involves just embracing, without embracing that mindset, just trying to do the work. I worked for an organization or company for 11 months that I left because they weren't being agile. They were just doing it, trying to do it. They weren't understanding the concepts of the sprint. They weren't understanding the concepts of, embracing the change or making sure that we have the processes in place and leading by example instead of just stepping in and still doing what they used to do in a traditional sense and just causing the agile processes to fail. So you can't just do it. We were, for example, in sprints and doing things that they thought that they liked. I want this on my website. I think this is cool. Let's make this map do this. Let's make this section of our website act in this way. But is that really what the customer wanted? It was because that's what they wanted, not because they were getting feedback from the customer. Or going into the middle of a sprint and asking, let's do this now. It's only going to take you 4 to 5 hours to complete this, instead of putting it in the backlog and doing it the way we wanted to have it done. Not realizing that, yeah, that's only 4 or 5 hours, but do you realize that now that's 4 or 5 hours that they're not doing something that should be done within that sprint. So we need to start with the mindset to be agile before you can actually successfully do the agile. And again, it's whatever methodology you choose, that's the agile that you do. And then project selection, I referred to talking about this, and this kind of refers to that dynamic funding. Traditionally, organizations do their strategic planning, then they go down to the business area, do the analysis of what are we going to do to come up with the strategy. Let's start planning projects. Let's pick the projects that we think are going to make the most sense to come to the strategy, and let's allocate our resources to them. So that's how traditional organizations plan for their projects and for what their KPIs will be. Now, in an agile way, it's again more going towards how do we empower our employees to make sure that we're getting and supplying the desired result and the value that we want as an organization. So the organization can define that strategic direction, and then they fund the teams. And then those teams can plan the projects from there and look, well, what projects do we need to do to meet the strategic direction? And what makes more sense? How do we do it? And in what order do we do it to make the most value? And then the resources are allocated, whether it be, the human resources, physical resources and monetary resources. So it's again doing that empowerment. It's looking at when we're down here and we're doing it this way, it gives the ability for the teams and to look at, okay, when they start working something, more dynamically change those funds around. This is not providing the value. We are not meeting this goal that's been set by leadership. What can we do What do we need to switch to? Instead of going through the long process in a traditional format where you're like, this isn't working out, then how do you go upstream back to the strategic planning, redo the project, maybe have a project fail or start over? Are we going to do another, business analysis to make sure that what we're trying to do will work? How do we do that? So this gives the organization teams and leadership and plan the leadership, the senior leadership, the ability to look at what their strategic goal is and find the projects dynamically that are going to meet those. Now, when we look at roles within the organization, we've talked, about leadership, senior leadership, the team. There is a difference on how agile projects and traditional projects are ran. Traditional project managers will have the command control style, this is the plan, this is the budget, this is the details, this is what I need to do, monitor, control, make sure that the team is doing the tasks, make sure that when the project is done, we close it out, we do all the steps. To where an agile project manager really doesn't play that role. They don't play the role of project manager. I mean, like Fred had said, one of the perfect words and I have these is servant leader. So they're promoting the collaboration, the adaptability, fostering the teamwork, opening up communication. They're encouraging the team to do the planning, to make adjustments as needed throughout the project, making sure that the teams are self-organized, empowering them to drive the decisions and outcomes, knowing that they have to stay within what's going to provide the most value and the quickest value for the customer. The servant leaders, what they do is they build that community. We've talked about earlier today too about where did you learn to listen? But they have to listen and they have to have persuasion. They have to be able to understand their team. And one of the biggest things is, as a servant leader, is you're going to remove those barriers to success. You're listening, you're finding and putting the right people in place in the right jobs, making sure that the barriers for the team the barriers are removed to let the team do their work. You're there to help them succeed, whether it be give them the training they need, give them whatever tools they need, but you're there to make sure that they are successful. And you're not controlling, you're coaching them to make the right decisions. And that, as an organization, is what's important. Is you're coaching your teams, coaching your leaders, and those people that are on the front lines to make the right decisions, to be empowered, and to be able to change when needed and not be so strict. So, some of the roles that you may see as a project manager in Agile is you may be a Scrum Master. We've talked about Scrum. So you may be a product owner. So you're managing the backlog. There are two different things. You're the product owner is there for the customer. They are there to make sure the customer is getting what they need. The Scrum Master is there to make sure that those processes are followed. You are the servant leader. You may have to be a mediator and facilitator. So the team may not be able to come to an understanding of what they want to do. And this may make sense within the organization of we have these two teams that can't determine what is the best project to reach the strategic goal. As a leader in an organization that's agile, you may not want to dictate. You may want to help facilitate, mediate, let them build the case and let them help decide by what they're doing, what makes more sense, what is going to work the best and bring the most value. You're coaching them. Because again, you need to identify those roadblocks, address the issues promptly. You need to remove those roadblocks, ensure risk management and solution and resolution of impediments are done quickly, making sure that the adaptability, innovation, and learning is there, making sure you're looking at the customer feedback and needs, and you have your technical strengths, balancing those two, getting those quick feedback loops and refine those processes and deliverables and products as quickly as possible as an organization. Collaborating with all the stakeholders, gather and prioritize requirements, empowering that team to embrace the change. Again, you need to champion the agile practice, processes and practices within the organization. And that's where, when we think about making an organization agile and bringing it into the organization, and it all starts with the mindset. It all starts with leading by example, championing it, encouraging our team to think and act the same way. Just a few more slides. So just to kind of summarize, agile is more than a term, trendy term, that organizations should hear and try to apply. Again, back to Anita's thing, they hear agile and they think, I think it's Scrum, or I don't know what to do, so let's just keep it status quo. But it's transforming, first of all, the mindset of the organization to work in an adaptive way. So it's not only those projects, and these things are ever changing based on what your customer needs are and what the market is telling you. Empowering and trusting employees to make the right decisions based on the needs of the environment and the market and the customer. Require the strong leaders to reduce constant oversight. So allow those teams to collaborate, do their best value, and requires having the right skills and personnel in place. As we talked earlier, how do the chief project officer relate to, like the HR, the chief human resource officer? You've got to make sure you have the right people. And I said earlier, one of the, what a restriction of agile is having a team that doesn't necessarily embrace that mindset or can't embrace that mindset, or so that may not be the right team. So you have to have the right people and skills in place. It can be taught, but it's also sometimes you need to make sure you have the right personnel. Again, just we talked about this earlier. I threw this in here just as a reminder that we have upcoming courses on agile project management. One in the spring, one in the fall. You can see the dates there, same as we talked about earlier.